So I'm from Manchester, so my accent probably sounds a little bit different. And if you need me to say anything again, then just ask any questions. I was also sick last week, so I might cough a little bit, and I'm eating mince a lot, so that's why I'm doing that. Later on in this talk, I'm going to talk about mixed martial arts, so there'll be some images that probably feel a bit violent, and there's talk about suicide and mental health, so I just wanted to flag that at the start. I'm going to talk about my 2 projects that I'm working on, long-term projects, and then I'm going to lead into how it's brought me here to Missoula. So that's just a little bit of structure to take you through. So one of the projects I'm working on, this is me, is in the remote north of Iceland, and I'm working with women who are working on the land and at sea, and it's such a remote place that when you're up there, there's one road that goes around the whole country, and you will come to like a farming settlement, and it'll be the only thing you see for like a long time. But these women are really interesting because they all know each other. So if something happens on one of the farms, someone will come from like 60 miles to come and help. So they have this community, but in a really spread out way. This project also started on a residency in Iceland. This was the artist house that I stayed in. It was in a little fishing community called Skagastrand in the north. And I had in my head that I wanted to do something with the community, maybe like the sheep farmers or the fishing people. So I went on these long walks out of town and ended up at this barn where there were all these sheep, and I thought, oh, maybe I'll meet someone here. And there was no one around. So as I was walking back out, this Jeep drove in, and these 3 farmers got out. And someone had come out of town to help them pump the slurry out of the barn. So I started talking to them and taking photographs with them. And one of them agreed to pick me up the next day and take me out to his dairy farm, which was out of town. So when I got there, I think he just got a bit like, he didn't really want to deal with me anymore. So he gave me over to his wife. And she's called Bjarni. And it opened up this whole project with the women out there who I think are probably more unseen. So when you think of Iceland and fishing and farming, you probably have like an image in your head of like a really weathered man with like a couple of fingers missing. And that is like, that does exist. But the women are really fascinating. So this was in October 2023. So I've been back to Iceland like 2 or 3 times a year since then. So when I went back last summer, it's a time of no nights in the summer in Iceland, so the sun never goes down. So I had these long days just driving. And for me, it's a lot about myself and solitude and going on these long drives, I guess, trying to find bits of myself as well in all these women that I'm meeting. So these were the routes that I took over a couple of weeks. I work an admin job to pay my bills, so I have to condense these trips into quite intense periods of time. And the woman I met, Bjarni, she lets me stay on her farm with her, and she gave me a car. So that support has been really helpful from her, and I've built a really good relationship with her. So I stay on this farm called Tjorn, and it's a dairy farm, and it's just, the thing with Iceland is when the weather comes in, they just have to work with it. So everything is secondary to the weather because it's so intense. So it's a really interesting way of life and quite fragile in a lot of ways. So these women are really soft-hearted, and they've got like beautiful skin because they're just outdoors all the time. So they've always got like color in their face, and they're so resilient and resourceful as well, and really strong. And they just don't, like, it's a bit of a no-nonsense thing as well. So they're really fascinating to me. And they work a lot in the dairy, so milking the cows. This is Bjarni. She's really shy, so it took me 18 months to get like a decent portrait of her. So she took me into the sheep barn where she goes and feeds all the rams. This ram looking, his name is Botti, and he's really special because he's like the Brad Pitt of rams. He's like really, really beautiful, but like his legs were a little bit too short, so they couldn't breed from him. And he's got this really beautiful wool, but it's really coarse and no one wants it because it's really hard to spin. So she sends me that wool and we've been spinning that by hand together. So it's a really nice link between us. And then when we fed the rams, she told me to come and sit on a hay bale and to like close my eyes and sit on the hay bale and just listen to the hooves on the wood and the sheep eating. And she says that she goes in there for her own solitude. So when you go into her house, there's this whole bit at the back with this heated floor and there's just sheep's wool everywhere, just drying. Oh, this is Botti. He's also had 3 mothers. He got abandoned by his mother. Then he got a second mother and got really happy, and then she died. And then I think he got put with a 3rd mother, and then he was really happy then. So he had a bit of a like dramatic life. So I found him quite interesting. And he does this. He will come forward when the camera comes out. So for me, my experience is I just drive and there will be some people that I've researched and talked to before I go. So it'll make like a bit of a skeleton route. But in between, there's these whole periods of time where I'm just like free to see what happens. So often I'll just follow my nose into places. And I always end up finding or being in the right places at the right time. That tends to happen. And then there'll be days when nothing happens and I think, oh, this is embarrassing, isn't it? Like nothing's happened for 3 days. Like what am I doing out here? And so I'm interested in how people and the land work together in these really remote areas where the weather is so intense, but they somehow make it work. So then when the winter comes, it's really, really dark, so they don't get much daylight. So I haven't been in the winter yet, so that's something that I would like to do maybe this winter. And Bjarni gave me contacts for other women across the north, so I visited other farms. And then I went to this remote peninsula where I'd found this one woman who goes out by herself in her own tiny little boat and fishes alone, which is kind of unusual for Iceland because it's quite a male-dominated industry. So I was really interested in her. So I went driving out into this really, it kind of felt like the edge of nowhere. And sometimes there's like a woman on my own on these trips. Iceland is like quite a gender progressive country. So when I go there, I feel quite safe. So as a woman, usually, especially in the UK, there will always be like a layer of vigilance, which probably a lot of women can relate to. So just walking around, you're always kind of alert, especially like when the light goes. In Iceland, that kind of gets removed from me a little bit. So I feel really free. So I think that's part of why I can do these projects by myself in that country. And there's 3 women in power in government in Iceland as well. So I think probably in my head, I would like this project to tell the story of women in Iceland and maybe end up there doing photographs with those women in power as well. So I'm quite interested in that. So I went out on the boat with this woman called Dora. And when they go out for 16 hours. So if you commit to getting on that boat, they're not coming back. And it's a tiny boat, so you're basically just really sick for 16 hours. And she talked about how she spends half the time in the year working in offices, and then she does the fishing by herself for the other half of the year just to kind of come back to herself. So she loves the solitude of it. And I had this image in my head and I wanted to get an image like this, which is why I committed to the fishing boat. So something like that to me makes it all worth it. She talked to me about how the sea is warming up, so they have to keep going further and further out to get the fish because the heat is pushing the fish into the colder areas. She told me that. She told me that the weather is getting more unpredictable, so it's feeling a bit more unsafe out there. So I like that there's these real stories attached to these people as well. I like that part of it. And for me, with these projects, to make them sustainable, I can always take things like that as like a mini series and pitch it to a publication, and someone will pay me for that commission so I can feed it back into funding the project. So to prepare for this trip, I decided that eating an entire packet of ginger biscuits was going to be a really good way to go. It wasn't. I just threw it all back up over the side quite quickly. And she's a stand-up comic, so she'd been documenting me the whole time. There was all sorts of videos and everything, and I had no idea that she was doing that. I was just having a truly terrible time. And I would get into a rhythm of, you know, when you throw up and you feel superficially better for like 15 minutes, I would then go and do photographs and then throw up and then go and pass out again. So I got into a bit of a routine. And then I went back inland and drove back towards the farm. So there's these huge mountains and you're just in these single track tunnels for a really long time in Iceland. So it's kind of magical driving around there, like by yourself. I listen to Oasis a lot in the car. Sometimes the Backstreet Boys as well. So I was driving across the land and there was this one farm, and someone in the previous town had told me that there's this woman that lives alone on one of the farms, which is fascinating to me because there's these really long, dark winters, and for someone to live so remote on their own like that, like I find that quite fascinating to talk to someone about their experiences with that. And when I got there, because it's also out in the middle of nowhere, people don't really speak English. So when I stop and meet them, the whole thing is just completely silent, which is also fascinating to interact. So there was this woman living in this house, and there was just a black cat walking around. So they're kind of magic moments with people. Then there's no trees in Iceland because they cut them all down and they're trying to replant them now. I really, really needed the toilet. So before I went into one of these long tunnels, there was just this tiny little group of trees at the side. So I pulled in to go to the loo. And I went into the woods and there was just this tiny little house in there. And I met this woman called Hydron who invited me in for hot chocolate. And she used to work as an environmental scientist. So we were just sitting there chatting about her time in that job. And then we just went out into the loop-ins and took photographs together. And there were lots of other random encounters with lots of different kinds of women. So this project is kind of in the early stages still. It'll probably take me another 2 or 3 years. So I'm excited to go back. When I finish this residency, I go to Iceland for another 2 weeks. And then I'll probably go back in the winter. So I'm excited to see where it's going to go with this project. And I did a bit of a scout trip in February to the West Fjords, which is a totally different area, like on the west corner. So that's just proper mountains. So it's really beautiful. And there's a lot of women that work there in factories. So the feeling is quite different. So I'm going to go back there and expand that too. So the next project I'm going to talk about is mixed martial arts men in a gym in Liverpool, which is close to me in the north of the UK. And it sounds like a completely different project, but actually these two projects speak to each other in quite an interesting way. So with the women, they're working in these kind of patriarchal, male-dominated, very wild, unforgiving environments. And going into this gym, even though it's a totally different situation because I'm going into one place and I'm just stuck in this one contained world. I think people probably think that mixed martial arts fighters are these aggressive, barbaric, wild animals. And in many ways they present that way. But I saw something else with them. I saw something a lot softer with them. So I wanted to pull that out in a project because I think it gets really misunderstood. So these are some of the images that you probably see attached to the UFC. This is a fighter called Paddy the Baddie, and he trains at the gym that I've been doing the project in, and he's done really, really well for himself. He's become a bit of a star, so he's interesting, but I'll talk about him later. And then there's loads of images like this. So this tends to be the layer of what you absorb when you look at images to do with mixed martial arts and the UFC. And so it's just this really tiny, narrow feeling. And my experience of being in that gym is that those stories, particularly of like representations of like this hyper-masculine, toxic ideas, or someone who's had a really, really disadvantaged background and has used mixed martial arts to create a new opportunity for themselves, which does happen. That tends to be the only stories that you hear, but there's so much more to it than that. And so I'm really interested in the project showing that. This started as a commission with the BBC, and I just pitched it and did it because I thought, well, it's completely out of my comfort zone. There's nothing in that gym that's going to be there for me. Like, nature always looks beautiful in photographs. The lighting's going to be terrible, and I know nothing about this sport, so I'm just going to go in and see what happens. And I walked in, and it is a really unforgiving environment at first. They're a really tight-knit, protective community, so they really hated me at first. And they gave me a really, really hard time. And also because he's really famous, I think they've experienced a lot of photographers going in there that are just there to take something from them, which is fair enough, really. So I ended up staying there for 6 weeks, just going back, and then I would just go back and try and learn about the sport and talk to people and just not take my camera, just to learn and see what was there. And just this whole world opened up. This was a year ago. When they saw this article at the end, they all loved it then, and then they all added me on Instagram. And so it started this really special long-term relationship with them. So I've been going back to the gym recently a lot, and they're near my hometown, so I can go back there quite frequently. But this community of men are supportive of each other. They're really gentle. In the gym, there's no violence in the way that you see. What you see with that violence is just that 6-minute fight at the end. Everything in between is this community of men supporting each other to be the best that they can be. They all talk together. They're constantly rolling together, so that idea of men being able to have that physical expression together is also quite interesting. And I guess in this gym, it's a safe space for them to do that. And it's a really complex sport. So it's like 5 Olympic disciplines in one. It's very considered. And they are highly intelligent, really smart people. So they are practicing systems of how to beat opponents. To like the microsecond, they know exactly what they're doing. So it's not this mindless, barbaric thing that I think a lot of people think it is. They turn up every day to work, no matter what. And I've learned a lot from them. So when you go into the gym, it's actually quite quiet. And there's just a lot of this going on. So I like that they switch between these really graceful moments together, and then suddenly they do present like kind of like wild animals as well. I quite like those two, that goes on in there. It's quite interesting. And 90% of this community, they've got a real talented like group of pro fighters. There's like 15 of them, but 90% of the community are just working guys who go there to train after work and connect with each other and focus on this sport. when they're training as professionals, they're either going to make it into the UFC or they're going to be nothing. So there's a real determination and a tenacity and a sense of like, you know, they're just fighting all the time in lots of different ways. So it's quite inspiring to be around them. So this is Paddy. It's really amazing for the North that Paddy has built such a great global platform for himself, and he's doing really good in the UFC at the minute. He's got into the top rankings now. He uses that platform to talk about what happens in northern cities in the UK. So there's a lot of male suicide, and he uses it at the end of fights to talk about that. And he supports local charities, so he really tries to stand up for that. So I'm interested in how the whole community is building something for Liverpool through this sport, creating opportunities for young men if they want it, that's not just offices and football. Oh, the sound is not on this. Do you know how I can turn this sound on? Hold it up to the mic. Do you think that's going to work?
Little baby Lee, little warrior, like more of a fighter than he was will ever be. But also, I woke up on Friday morning at 4 a.m. to a message that one of my friends back home had killed himself. This was 5 hours before me weigh-in. So Ricky, lad, that's for you. But there's a stigma in this world that men can't talk. Listen, if you're a man and you've got weight on your shoulders and you think the only way you can solve it is by killing yourself, please speak to someone. Speak to anyone. People would rather, I know I'd rather he may cry on his shoulder than go to his funeral next week. So please, let's get rid of this stigma and men start talking.
So for someone in the UFC, when you've got the likes of Donald Trump and Elon Musk sat in the front row and there's this whole image of it, for someone in the UFC to talk like that, I think is a really, it's just a really inspiring, interesting dynamic that he's created for himself. So there's no second generation mixed martial arts fighters yet because the sport is so new. So this gym is also nurturing all the values of discipline and working hard, and this community of men, it's nurturing it in young boys in the city as well. And I go in there and they just love it together, like they have so much fun. And there's no getting away from the fact that it is violent. It's like a consensual violence, but it's a lot more contained than I think people think it is. So there's young boys coming up in this gym. This gym has got real charisma, so they're doing really, really good. They're just creating this whole hub of stars in there because of the way that they are. And then there's like the 7-year-olds. And you know what was so interesting about this photograph is that when I went to take the photograph, I didn't even have to ask them to stand like that. So they're just learning from like the older ones. I thought that was fascinating, that they just know how to stand. So this gym actually started 20 years ago. The guy who started it, he trained for a brand called Next Generation in California, and he deliberately brought it back. He trained as a black belt and deliberately brought it back to Liverpool to create this whole thing for the city. So it's been very intentional, and it's 20 years later and they've just done amazing. So after this residency, I'm going to go to Vegas and Irvine, I don't know how you guys say it, where this whole story started. And there's some people that I can meet that used to train with Paddy's coach who started this gym. So I'm really excited about that, to build the project out in that way. And so all this has led me to Missoula on this garden, which also sounds like it has nothing to do with anything, but I think it does. So I always just go on gut a lot of the time, and people, land, and community is always the thread that pulls all these projects together. So I was really interested in what they were doing on this garden. And it was interesting that Genevieve said that they really liked me on the applications, because when I submitted my application to Open Air, you're supposed to pick like a second choice, but I didn't. I thought, well, it's either Garden City Harvest or nothing for me. So it's been really nice to hear that. And I've been running workshops. It's been really nice for me here because it's been a chance to just be somewhere for 6 weeks instead of being on the move all the time, because those projects do take it out of me a lot. So I've been in the barn upstairs painting paper to run cyanotype workshops. So for me, I work all in film manual methods of photography. So it's been really nice to go back to doing these chemical methods that I started in. So I've been doing cyanotype workshops. And the barn is perfect because you can roll down the shutters and it goes really dark in there, so that I can paint the paper to make it light sensitive. So these are two chemicals mixed together, and when you paint them you can paint them on any surface, it becomes light sensitive, so they call it liquid light. So we had a workshop last week using these papers and choosing things from the garden that are being grown here to make cyanotypes. So it was a really nice way to connect people with the garden and the things that are being grown at Garden City Harvest. And they get pressed onto the paper and put out in the sunlight, so the sun will start activating the chemicals. And then you put them in water afterwards, and they create these really beautiful blue holographic prints. So we had a great time. So my interest for the rest of my residency, I've gone to the Northside Garden, which is the original garden of the 22 sites on Garden City Harvest. And I think it was started even before Garden City Harvest in the 70s by the community themselves. So I was really interested in that site because it's like the origin story, and there's no fences, so the whole site just sort of sinks into the town. So it was really interesting to me. And it feels like quite a private site, so a lot of people go there for solitude. And then I thought a really nice thing to do would be to do cyanotype, but on patches of fabric. And I thought all the people that work on this site can make a patch from their area of garden, and I can sew it together in a quilt. So it becomes like a photographic quilt to represent the site. So I've been around all the thrift stores, which are amazing, aren't they? Everything's like $2. And I found these sheets last week. It has to be a natural fabric, so I was really made up to find them. So I've been painting these in the dark rooms with the chemical over at the university, because the program's so amazing, it's connected with all these brilliant resources at the university. And I'm just halfway through the residency, so I don't have anything else to show you that I've made so far, but this is where I'm up to. So it's been a great experience in Missoula. I've absolutely loved it. All the community and how welcoming it's been, and just connecting with it in this way has been brilliant. And it's been a real stopover for me, a real rest for me to just focus on all the reasons why I started photography in the first place. So thanks for listening.